Okay, thank you. So that was an instrumental piece called "Thoughts of Home," but it really could be about anything. It's kind of left to the imagination. Um, and I guess, Jerry, that I do another song. Is that correct? Okay. All right. So this song I did not write. It was written by a young lady, or at least she was young at the time, named Jen Hamill. She used to be in a popular Celtic band here in town. They played a lot at the Mucky Duck. But she has since gone on went back to school and got a PhD. Now she's a college professor. So I tracked it down because I wanted to cover her song, and it was not listed on the Fox agency. That's where musicians get their royalties. So anyway, I got a hold of her, and it was all very pleasant. And I, told her what I wanted to do, and she was very supportive. I sent her a check, and when the project's done, I sent her a copy of the CD. I haven't heard back since. I don't know what that means. But anyway, this one is called "Tender is the Night." I've always been here in these green hills. The road runs by. The sky is low at night. I will always be here in this place. I will always light fires at the end of the day. The smoke rises up. It streams to the sky. Might attract a passerby. Tender is the night. When I am busy feeling mad, I don't care what they say. Not if I were a million boys. The key fell down the well. I have spent years thinking of the moon. Now it makes me think of you. Tender is the night. Tender is the night. When is a song a song? When is it a plea that lasts so long? When is it a serenade of the shambling and shy? Something to hum, for vibrato to try. Something to whistle when the train passes by. When a love affair dies. Tender is the night. Tender is the night. Tender is the night. Thank you very much.
That was amazing, Jim, and a perfect beginning to our morning. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Okay, our main speaker today is David Gorman. He has 25 years of leadership in finance, investment, entrepreneurship, government, and philanthropy. He served the Commonwealth of Australia as Senior Investment Director in New York under the government of Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. David's finance and investment career began with Morgan Stanley and Stearns, where he enjoyed experience in global equities, fixed income, and alternative asset class markets. In 1998, he helped his partner Jim establish their swim school, which teaches 2,500 students each week in New York City and Houston. A graduate of Columbia University, David speaks Spanish, Portuguese, and French. He studied Italian, Japanese, and Russian. A native of Miami, David resides in New York City with Jim and their 2 rescued Great Danes. David served on the board of Stop Drowning Now, a nonprofit that seeks to end drowning through education and public advocacy. With no further ado, I would like to invite my dear friend and today's speaker, David Gorman, to the screen.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in and having me today. Communities such as yours are so important, especially in days of uncertainty like we're in now. And I'm grateful to see all of these new faces, particularly in Houston, for which I have a great deal of affection. I'm a native Miamian. But my partner, Jim, he happens to be chauffeuring me. He is a native Houstonian, and he and Terry first met about the time of the Revolutionary War, or was it the Civil War, when they were teaching at Springwoods High School. So I am going to speak today about the economic and the socioeconomic elements of the time we are in, and that we're working through, particularly after the pandemic. Many of the elements that we face have been with us for a very long time and are not only creature to the United States, but other countries mature around the world. I am going to share my screen starting right about now, and I am going to take you to some slides. Okay. Abhishek, do I come across all right?
Yes, it's good.
Okay, very good. So I'm calling today, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. I was a history major, and I found it so useful over my years to understand a context, understand a little bit of how things unfold through human behavior, and that'll help us kind of frame what we're going to talk about today. So the key takeaways I hope to leave you with and keep you thinking about is why our economy and society can recover, how history points the way, not perfectly, but directionally. There's some similar things, although the circumstances in our culture really dictate that. And then what are the challenges and signposts as we recover from this COVID-19 era? So let's talk about who is this Panjandrum. That means me. I like fancy words. I find great power in language. And so this is one that I picked up and I thought would be interesting to kick things off. As Terry mentioned, I learned this stuff in the financial world first. I worked for very large organizations, Morgan Stanley and Stearns. I went then to Arden Asset Management, which was an independent, privately owned hedge fund firm. And then I did some smaller organizations for shorter periods of time, including investment work on my own. I also work for the Australian government. Now, obviously, you can tell from my accent that I am not Australian, but Australia is very practical, and they recruit foreign nationals to work in their offices abroad to help them with skills they don't have and also save costs. My work there was in foreign direct investment, foreign affairs, domestic policy, and towards the very end, I got to work with some of the leading politicians, the leader of the opposition, which I met through working with 2 previous prime ministers in the Labour Party. So my investment experience has been some very common things that you probably have in your own investment portfolios, and some esoteric things like credit default swaps, MBS, RMBS, futures and forwards, multi-currency credit facilities, holding company revolvers, but then things that might be more familiar like cattle ranching. I did a cattle ranching project in central Queensland. I did a fashion startup here in New York by a guy who won Project Runway twice. So it's really been very interesting to have a very big diversity of experience and see what the common elements are and what the differences are. Terry mentioned earlier swim gym. We have 5 locations in New York City, and we have 1, soon to be 5, in Houston. We're over on Willcrest between Briar Forest and Memorial. So again, I get to come to Houston frequently. I've been coming a long time, and I enjoyed the city very much. It's a very underappreciated city in the United States and the world. So let's look at some history and basic economic truths. Major social and economic disruptions are common in the world. So looking at the last century, we had the Spanish flu of 1918, which killed many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. We had the Great Depression, which was a global rupture in our economy for a variety of reasons. We also experienced world wars. And here in New York, we experienced September 11th, 2001. In each case, and even in recent cases like the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, fears and panic were rife. There was radical economic and social transformation predicted, yet the global economy recovered to growth and societies evolved. It was not a complete return to what it was like before, but it continued, we continued to grow and adapt to new conditions. You will see in the background that my 2 assistants there are Aries and Apollo. I don't expect them to make any noise, but you may see a Great Dane poke their nose in any moment. Specific examples of the changes, the challenges, the crises we work through. I'll have one here in Houston, the 1980s oil bust when Jim and Terry first met. Jim at the time first worked at Phil Hansel's Swimming Academy, which was over in the River Oaks area. During this period, revenue fell 12-15%, which was material. Those of you who remember and were in Houston at the time, gas was 60 cents a gallon, which is pretty remarkable. Here in New York, very recently, in the global financial crisis, we saw a huge amount of layoffs, terminations, unemployment overall, destruction of wealth. And our company's revenue fell about the same amount as Phil Hansel's did in the 1980s. What I say this, the reason I bring these up is that Houston has recovered. It is a hugely dynamic and fast-growing city. New York has recovered, and both are stronger than they ever have been. So there were many, many years of growth, and we were responsible. Society was responsible. The adaptability of the human animal was responsible. So the reason of why are some familiar things to us: basic human needs and instincts. That is in turn drives population growth and consumption. And then that in turn drives competition and innovation. We'll walk through each of these in turn. Our hierarchy of needs is very well known. This was first conceived of by Maslow, the social scientist. Increasingly, as we have more advanced and wealthy and peaceful societies, we first meet our physiological needs, we meet our safety needs, the love and belonging, our families, friends, other sense of connection to society like the Houston Oasis has today. We have esteem for ourselves and our individual communities, and then self-actualization, those things that call us via philanthropic work, via our spirituality, via civic work to be our better selves. Now, the reason is because we focus on survival. We do the basics first. We breathe, we eat, we try not to be eaten. So as this warthog is finding with the cheetah, best to stay alive in order to provide for your children. And then that allows us to move up to reproduction, security, family, etc. Now, this is a baby warthog called Gus. Completely coincidental that I happened to find a baby warthog at the Houston Zoo. So one of your youngest Houstonians making an appearance. But the interesting part of this is for us to think about the basic things that motivate us as animals also motivates us in terms of how we develop our economies and how we drive forward in returning to stability and growth. That brings us to how populations grow, but also in terms of our consumption. Some of you may have seen population pyramids, such as this one. It delineates by age cohort what our population currently is by some very simple age groups for men and for women, men on the left and women on the right, and how our population distribution looks across the country. So you will see that we have a decent distribution across age groups. You'll notice that we are extending our longevity into the 90s and even into the hundreds. And then you'll notice a little bit of a contraction down at the bottom where we have fewer 0 to 10-year-olds than we do 25 to 29-year-olds. So this is not great, but it's also not terrible. But if we had looked at the population pyramid, the demographic period for 1950, it would have been a pretty straightforward triangle. However, the top ranges, the top cohorts of population age would be non-existent because population expected lives were much shorter. If we look at a population like Japan, we see that their demographic pyramid is quickly inverting, or slowly as time goes by. This is a little bit earlier than the United States one, but you can see that among the 40 to 44 and the 65 to 69 cohort, they're much more populous than at the 0 to 34, 39. This means that Japan's population is actually people who lived in Japan, who are of Japanese descent or Japanese themselves. Part of this is because Japan is highly insular and has many cultural values that make inward migration challenging. So the reason that population growth and the ages of our population are very important is that human consumption drives economies. Here in the United States, about 70% of our economy is driven by us, driven by human beings who buy stuff for our children, we buy stuff for our pets, we buy cars, we buy homes, we buy tchotchkes and decoration for Halloween. That is the basis for which we both try to make our lives better for ourselves, our children, and our families, but also it helps to create the income and the wealth that really gives us a strong economy. The US economy today is about 25 trillion. We probably have shrunk a little since the COVID crisis, maybe $1 trillion, but we're still the, if not the largest, the second largest in the world behind China. So what we need, certainly as the US illustrated a little bit, and as Japan illustrated in much more urgency, is we as a society need more babies, and we need sustainable immigration. For example, immigrants will typically fill jobs that the graying population of the United States needs, and that, frankly, we don't want to do. Home healthcare aides is an example of one. Food processing is another. Yes, there are jobs available, but they're typically in jobs that people with higher levels of education, people who have started in the United States, they don't want to do. So we need to have some sort of sustainable immigration. And I think that that will probably be, the research I've seen suggests that that will probably be really the only offset to higher organic population growth, making babies. The young people today, that will be many of this group's children and grandchildren, are highly unlikely to have many children of their own, simply because our generations younger than us very well may be the first that have lower quality of life, lower growth than we have. So competition and innovation is really what helps make an economy much more efficient. There's pluses and minuses to competition and innovation, but overall it helps make us wealthier. It gives us goods and services at lower prices and allows us to have an increasingly strong quality of life. Competition pushes us to find growth. I like to say the effect of competition on an economy is very simple and similar to how competition would impact an athlete like Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps didn't win 22 gold medals competing against himself. He was pushed by other people competing with him to make him seek better, stronger, faster. Competition always also requires us to be honest. It helps us understand what we need to do ourselves, that the other party, the other competitors are going to be on their toes to try to develop or gain an advantage. And so when an employee of ours, Kyle Shaw, he's the one in the Power Rangers suit, has this other gentleman's foot, the other gentleman is going to have to be pretty honest with himself whether or not he is going to be able to get out of this and be a little bit more comfortable. Great companies are born during these crises. Great companies have come from entrepreneurs and visionaries who see things that a lot of us don't, that they have a different emotional makeup or vision, and they are able to meet the needs of consumers almost before the consumer knows that they need them. Walt Disney started in a very depressed time in our history and economy. Charles Revson started Revlon in 1932, also at a similar low point for consumption for a variety of reasons, for economic growth. The other companies you will recognize, each of these started in tough economic times. Disney recognized that during the depths of the Great Depression, that people would enjoy and even need to be able to go and pay a quarter or whatever it was to see an animated movie like Snow White, so that they could escape for a little bit, enjoy some climatized air, if it was invented at that point, I'm not sure, and to have a little bit of pleasure at a low cost, and deliver that to vast amounts of people. I would say it's pretty amazing if you think about it, that Snow White, when it was released, generated in today's dollars about $150 million. Talk about a blockbuster, right? Charles Revson saw that during the interwar years, that when times were tough, that women may not be able to buy some expensive clothes, but they may be able to spend 50 cents or $1 on a new lipstick. So these leaders, again, knew that valuable products and services are always in demand. Consumers want to have things that make their lives easier, their lives more efficient, or things that give their spirit or their family pleasure. They understood the times in the context of what people could and could not do, and they understood the client's emotions and instincts, the hierarchy of needs, a little bit better before the client did. They saw that how people needed to be fulfilled, especially like my examples of Disney and Charles Revson. They understood what motivated human behavior. They understood how folks going up that triangle needed to be helped. And they also reinvested for the long term. They continued to develop new products and services, and they continued also to make mistakes. They took risks. That's what entrepreneurs do. That also drives economic growth. So what are our challenges today? What are the things that we must overcome, address, innovate around, develop workarounds that we have to think about today? Some are familiar, some are not. The familiar ones to us are aging populations in developed countries. We already touched on that in the United States and Japan. We have young populations in emerging countries. India is very much a country that has a young population. Nigeria has a hugely young population, and it's also growing in wealth and in speed. We in the developed markets, we have mammoth debts. Our national debt is probably almost the size of our gross domestic product, our total economic output each year. And we also have a lot of what we call off-balance sheet debts. Social Security is one of them. The debts that come from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and the other mortgage guarantees, those are other ones. We also face domestic and international political uncertainty. Everyone knows, no matter your political orientation, your political preference, that this has been a highly volatile past few years. That has been the case internationally as China has grown in wealth and power, and there have been struggles with the European Union and the withdrawal of the United Kingdom. There's also been very much a widening gap between the rich and the poor. That's not only in emerging markets, but that's also in developed markets like ours. If you have watched a Biden town hall recently, you would have seen that he spoke about a K-shaped recovery where the economy post-COVID has done very well for the very wealthy, the top 1%, really the 0.001%. And then the rest of us have struggled. It has been a time of great uncertainty and great risk. We have more and more religious and ideological conflicts. We have nationalism that we struggle against. We have continuing conflicts in the role that religion plays in our society and other society. These are things that Samuel Huntington maybe 30 years ago said are the clash of civilizations, the clash of culture. They are very hard to overcome because looking at the Middle East, looking at Israel, there's not a lot of middle ground if I am a Muslim or I am a Jew and we have the same holy ground that we each feel that we should claim. And then lastly, what we're in right now, plagues and pandemics like COVID-19 and MRSA. We have been through this before. We have been through all of these before, and it is rocky, but we have surpassed them. We have some truly unfamiliar ones that we must also address and overcome. Man-made climate change is chief among them. Massive global population is also chief among them. We have, in the next couple of years, we will have more population growth in 1 year than the entire of civilization for several centuries. I don't remember what the exact statistic was, but almost 8 trillion people, which I think that we will reach sooner than expected. We have incredibly long lifespans also with the populations. The lifespans have largely been driven by medical innovations, by very simple things like washing hands and antibiotics. But we never had in scale, in volume, the sheer number of people in their 90s, their hundreds, and some people say that we will enter into our 110s in the not so distant future. Myself, for Jim, For Terry, for many of you here, that is actually on the table. We have energy uncertainty and yet high demand. 8 trillion people need energy to drive healthcare, to drive education, to drive sanitation. We have technological warfare that we have never seen before. Artificial intelligence, nanites, drones. These things have not sort of mainstreamed their way into our lives yet, but in many ways it's here, and it's definitely coming. We also have information warfare with speed and scale. Now, propaganda has been around in every single war. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, and he talked about how there were radio, how there were leaflet droppings to manipulate the emotions of opposition troops, of allied troops. So it's not new, but the thing that is new is the speed at which it's delivered to us via our devices, as well as the volume that can reach us, how it can be real or how it can be fake, deep faked. This is relatively new because our brain chemistry, our brain mechanics really struggle to process all of this information and know what to believe. And then, I don't know, 2020 has been a strange year. Will we have Asians? It's only October. It is entirely possible that we will. Obviously, I'm kidding, but when we had the murder hornets, anything seemed to be possible, right? How will we overcome them? How will we overcome all of these challenges and get back to whatever the new normal is, whatever the new growth is? The answer is we don't really know yet. We as a society and as an economy generally build the airplane as we are on the runway. We have to react very, very quickly to new things because we can't tell the future. And we have to remember and be very humble, be very respectful that success is not guaranteed. Nations have risen and fallen. Civilizations have risen and fallen. That can be from the several Egyptian empires. I think that there was 29 of them, to the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Sumerian Empire, to most recently the British Empire, the Russian Empire. These things do happen, they do change, and they are unpredictable if the leaders and the population, people like us, get too comfortable. But they can also grow and they can also evolve. Going back to the United Kingdom has been absolutely remarkable in its awareness, its acceptance, its development of how it must respond to changes both among its population, in the physical UK itself, but also what was formerly called the British Empire. And the United States, we're right there. You know, our role is changing in the world. Our role will continue to change. And it is because we've faced so many things that are uncertain, it will also be a process of discovery. So I close this presentation by saying hope is not a strategy. We cannot hope for the best. We must participate in civil life like the Oasis does for each of you today and every day. We must participate in our political life, whether we are doing political volunteerism at the national level, the state level, the municipal level, even running for our neighborhood or HOA council. We must participate. That is the nature of democracy. And as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the least worst form of government that we have ever had. So it will never happen here is denial, and we can deny things on a massive social scale. But the only way that we can possibly overcome this and get on and take our next step forward, I'd like to say, please vote on November 3rd. Whoever you vote for, please get out and vote. Please encourage your family, friends, neighbors to vote. It is essential for us to participate, and it is essential for us to express who we are, and as Terry said when she first opened the session, to put people first. This is my contact information. I encourage you to direct any comments or questions you have to me or through Terry. And if there's time now, can I take some questions? How do we proceed at this point?
Well, what we're going to do is go into breakout rooms for about 5 to 7 minutes, and where everybody can talk about say hello, talk about what you've said, and then come back for Q&A in just a little bit. So,
5 to 7. Okay, great.
all right.
All right.
That's you're ready to go.
All right, so everyone, you should be getting a breakout room option soon. And for those of you on YouTube and Facebook, we'll be back shortly. You can go ahead and grab a cup of coffee and we'll be right back. And we're out.
Yay.
everyone. Terry is going to start our Q&A shortly. Let me start the streaming.
Thank you so much. We are going to open up for anyone with questions or anyone who wants to mention an idea that your breakout room came up with. As always, please keep your questions and comments brief so that we can get to as many people as possible. We know everyone is muted, so if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand and we will unmute you. I believe you may also have the ability to unmute yourself. So, I believe Dr. Richard Andrews had a question.
Yes, thanks for the talk. That was very interesting. With your exposure to different countries around the world and that kind of stuff, what good models have you seen for moving economies in the direction of being more sustainable, like environmentally sustainable?
That's a very good question. So environmental sustainability is still very new in terms of the political discourse generally around the world. I would say there's also a lot of folks who don't believe it's an issue or they believe that it's overblown, but I would say we can look to New Zealand as a very good example. We can look to Singapore as a very good example. They have a great deal of innovation because they have it culturally, they have it politically, and so forth. Australia has not done a great deal of a good job because coal has been a large part of the economy, and there's a very significant coal lobby there. And but I would say in the political sphere, Australia has gotten a lot of things right. The single most important one I would point to is compulsory voting. And so every Australian, once they reach the age of 18, I think is the voting age, they're automatically registered to vote. Every Australian immigrant who receives Australian citizenship is automatically required to vote. And there's a penalty. If you don't pay it, I think if you don't vote, then you get a tax of $250 or something. And you don't have to vote for any of the candidates. You can vote for Mickey Mouse. You can vote for nobody. It's up to you. So those are the single most important one. Australia also has an extraordinary system of healthcare, of retirement income, and bankruptcy laws, which I won't go into today. But those are two, of course, that I know very well. I think that there are probably some others around the world who do well, but there's also plenty that don't, particularly in the environmental and conservation.
All right, thank you. Barun had a question. You want to unmute yourself and ask?
He doesn't have a microphone, so we can ask the question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so the question, Baron asked the question, Brexit seems to be a UK reaction against globalization and Europeanization. This does not seem to be very adaptive to the UK's diminished role from the heyday of the British Empire. Does Brexit disprove your assertion that UK has adapted to its post-World War power role?
Sure, so you can argue that. You can argue that that is an expression of it in one way. I would also assert, though, that the independence of Britain from the European Union is not a new thing. It's a very old thing. It is from the very days of the formation of the European Union. In fact, Margaret Thatcher said, "No, no, no." That was her response to having not only a political union, but an economic union. And so none of these issues are black and white in many ways. And so I think that what the expression of the UK's broad desire to leave the European Union completely is related to globalism. It is also related to much of the internal management of the country for places outside of London and a handful of other cities. So if we go to London,
I guess we'll wait. It's probably going through a tunnel.
Probably so.
We'll wait a couple minutes. Please continue posting your questions, and we'll. Okay, there he is.
sorry about that. Did I cut out for a moment?
Yes, but you're back. Oh.
Is he gone?
No, I think it's a connection issue.
Right.
Yes, please continue posting your questions, and there.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
No problem. So
just to wrap up on the UK, lot of sentiments that it's not the Britain that many people recognize, and thus they voted to leave the European Union because it wasn't working for them.
Okay, so the next question. Okay, Susan has a question.
Be sure to unmute
Susan,
yourself.
There we go.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So some of the obstacles, some of the things that need to be gotten past, we have put on not on hold, but we have just dilly-dallied for ever and ever, and it seems like we're used to dilly-dallying. How could you prioritize the things that we need to change? That seems so obvious. That a lot of the part of the world has gotten past a long time ago. How can we prioritize and speed up those obvious things to get around to the newer ones?
Sure. So that's a very good question. I think that the first one is political reform. The amount of money in the US in politics is absolutely unbelievable, because remember, it is not only Democrat versus Republican, US versus China, it's also the political class and us civilians. So that's an issue. It is the money spent through the media. You know, Biden just raised $303 million last month, 1 month. And that money will go into his war chest and be spent on media. That is crazy. So that is an important thing for us to consider as we reform. Mandatory voting, I'm a very big believer. It never occurred to me until I worked for the Australian government that that was possible. So political reforms are essential. I mix feelings about term limits because I think that there is a great deal of growth or a great deal of positive in having folks that are dedicated, experienced political leaders.
Right.
But I think that those, but also taking off the table things that are also just crazy, like not having healthcare for everybody. Some of these things will eventually change over time, but it only becomes possible if all of us have a way to participate. Gerrymandering, awful.
Okay.
Okay.
So the next question we have is from Johnny on Facebook. He's trying to ask about your perspective on the capitalism versus socialism, where capitalism has created significant wealth, but there's people who are disadvantaged in society, that it hasn't reached everyone. So that's
Sure.
being taken out on socialized programs and ideologies. What do you think of this?
So that's a very good question, and it's a timely one given the wealth gap that has continued to develop in the United States. I will say that socialism, first of all, I don't think that wholesale socialism works. It can't work because when we centralize everything, there has never, ever been a time in modern history when a centralized economy has worked. Now, a lot of whether or not socialism works depends on how you define it. And clearly something is not working if the average income in the United States is $45,000, which is flat to negative if you adjust it for time. So I don't think that we can simply tax our way out of it. I don't think that that works. I don't think that capitalism is replaceable by another system, but I think that if we continue to find ways of participating in our society, doing, here's an idea. I would like if the very wealthy people that I know were able to see if they don't pay more in taxes, if they don't give more industrial relations and work closer with unions, that eventually the mob is going to come. You know, the guillotine was not that far away. You know, those things happen, and they happen more frequently than we realize. In fact, every time there was a Gilded Age, there was some kind of change that took that away. But we have the greatest tool for educating ourselves right here in our hand. So we must be willing and aware to educate not only ourselves, but to educate our families and to take action. It's hard. It's very, very hard. There is not one fell swoop that will cure what ails us. And the balance, the uncertainty between socialism and capitalism, both of them are like salt when you're cooking. If you put too much in, it isn't good. In fact, it can be revolting. And if you don't put enough, it doesn't make the dish successful. You might have to throw out the oversalted one. But that's actually a shitty example, but you get the point.
I think Samia has a question.
Thank you. And thank you, Abhishek, and thank you, David. That was fabulous. I would like you to help me connect population needs from food to clothing to shelter. And, you know, the saying is demography is destiny.
Exactly.
So when you have a pyramid that is not a pyramid, or when you have populations of different ages that are so large versus the population that is young and not so large, that is demography, and that is the destiny of the political structure unless we change consumerism. Because in order for that change to happen, habits have to change.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you in philosophy, but the application of that, I think, is much harder,
Absolutely.
because the transition, how we transition from consumption to something else, is very hard to do in scale. We could, and then many people have started to, it's become much more of a popular thing to live off the grid, right? To do more farming, to do more things ourselves, to live in a much more economical way. That is much harder, I believe, for the simple fact that our need and the opportunity that's presented by technology isn't going anywhere. Whether that is through healthcare, through the older age cohorts, or whether that is through education for the younger folks. So demography is destiny, but there is a great deal of opportunity for growth in there, as exemplified by Japan. It all comes with risks. It all comes with risks. And in many ways, you know, we're only in 200 years of industrialization and only in a few decades of the information age, because time immemorial, we were an agricultural society. And this is new, right? This is new. So it's another one. Well, thank you for it. I don't have an answer.
Fair enough. We have one more question. I guess that's it's more.
Last question. Okay.
Yes. So you have any opinion on underground movements like all these groups like QAnon and others, and the recent kidnapping? Apparently, there was something about the Michigan governor kidnapping. So you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I think that these, that wouldn't call them movements. I don't think that that's a movement. I think it's an expression of powerlessness, of desperation, of a sense of trying to make sense of a world where people don't feel part of it. I guarantee you that folks like QAnon, they seek, or adherents or believers in QAnon, they seek the same kind of connection that you all do here through the Houston Oasis, that folks that are your neighbors seek through church, that we often seek through Facebook. And I think it is a sort of a sense, because if you notice, it's a very United States kind of thing, that it is about feeling in control or some sort of control, but also not understanding what's happening. Also not understanding about how how kind of primitive things are. If you worked in government, you would be shocked at how much baling wire and duct tape there is. And not in a bad way, it's a good way. And it's just kind of how we work as societies, or how we work as collective, messy organizations of people. But I think that those are expressions of panic. They are not new either. I mentioned earlier that my grandfather fought in World War II. My paternal grandfather was actually a Pearl Harbor survivor. The Holocaust was exactly that. Germans at the time did not recognize their Germany. They were afraid. They sought an other on which that they thought for sure that they would be able to cure their ills. How awful and devastating is that? But I would say that they have a very hard time lasting. They have a very hard time maintaining some degree of sustained momentum, because they're not based on facts. But make no mistake, they can do damage in between, like the Michigan governor has experienced. So, you know, pay attention. I've actually been educating myself a lot on propaganda, misinformation, the use of technology in disinformation, deliberate. And I encourage you all to read it. It's kind of, it speaks a lot to human nature. it speaks a lot to how the vast majority of us don't understand the technology and the effects of that technology, the bombardment, the volume that is put on our brain. And think objectively, think critically, challenge one another in places like the Houston Oasis.
Thank you, David. That
Welcome.
has given us a lot to think about, which is really nice. Very lovely talk.
Thank you.
Before we go, we have one more song from Jim Cam. We are going to post the link to donate and sign up for our weekly newsletter in the chat window. While we are no longer meeting in a physical space, we are still paying the musicians and still have some fixed expenses. So if you like what we're doing and you are able, please consider donating. And with that, we will have
Jim,
one
before
more.
I have to hop because we have arrived at our destination, but I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to do service with the Houston Oasis community. Someday when I get back, hopefully when we're all able to meet in person, I would love to visit and meet you all.
Thank
Thank you. Have a great Sunday. Bye. Thank you, Terry.
Well, Jim, the floor is yours. Or the screen is yours.
Okay, here is, I think, the first song I ever wrote, or first piece I ever wrote for the Chapman Stick. It's called Daydream, which was essentially how it came to me. I was laying on the couch Sunday afternoon, having imbibed in, shall we say, spirits. Anyway, the mind-altering substance from Ireland, I believe it was, Guinness.
That was just beautiful, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Special thank you to David Gorman and Jim Cam. Tonight, be sure to join us for another Corona Convo tonight at 8 p.m. with Oasis doctors, Dr. Richard Andrew and Will Judy. Keep an eye out for our future emails, Facebook posts, meetups, however you keep in contact with us for our future gatherings. So have a great week and stay safe out there, guys.